a quiet, ordinary neighborhood. By day, laughter filled the streets, the scent of fresh coffee drifted from cozy cafes, and life moved at an unhurried pace. But on the night of February 3rd, everything changed. According to police reports, Brookmont vanished overnight. 432 people gone without a trace. No screams, no distress calls. Houses were left untouched, dinner plates still on tables. Cups of coffee cooling on countertops. It was as if the entire district had simply ceased to exist. And now, Detective Ethan Cross Keanu Reeves had arrived to uncover the truth. The clock read to 47 a.m. when Ethan stepped onto the silent streets of Brookmont. The streetlights still burned, casting eerie shadows along the sidewalks. The air was too quiet. In a natural stillness, it pressed against him, thick and suffocating. There wasn't a single person in sight. The police radio crackled. The static noise filled the car, distorting into something else, a whisper, muffled, distant, yet unmistakably human. The words were indecipherable, tangled in layers of white noise. Ethan frowned. No signal. Great, he muttered, adjusting the frequency. But the radio remained silent. A nearby house caught his attention. Its windows were fogged up, a single light flickering inside. The front door was slightly ajar, swaying gently in the night breeze. Pushing it open, he stepped inside. The air was thick with the scent of dust and something metallic. On the dining table, 2 plates of untouched food sat waiting. Chairs remained perfectly in place. Nothing was overturned. No sign of a struggle. Something had taken them without a fight. Then he heard it, the sound. From upstairs, Ethan's breath slowed. His fingers instinctively wrapped around the grip of his gun. Something moved. The wooden stairs creaked under his weight as he climbed, each step slow and deliberate. At the top, a sudden chill crept through the air. The windows were shut, no way for wind to seep in. Yet, he felt it. And then, a whisper. 17th breath. Ethan froze. Where had he heard that before? He flicked on his flashlight, sweeping it across the attic. A desk covered in scribbled notes and strange symbols. Red ink, or perhaps something worse, stained the surface. One word stood out, carved deeply into the wood. Tenebrae. Then the police radio shrieked to life. Static erupted through the speaker, followed by a distorted scream. Get out. Get out now. And in that instant, the back door slammed shut. Ethan wasn't alone. The door slammed shut with a deafening bang. Ethan spun around, his gun raised, his breath steady despite the eerie silence that followed. The wind outside had died completely. The room felt wrong, too still, too empty. His eyes flicked back to the word carved into the desk. Tenebrae. He traced the letters with his gloved fingers. It was old, deeply etched. Who had written it, and why? A shuffling sound just behind him. Ethan turned in an instant. Gun aimed. Nothing. Just the dim attic, cluttered with boxes and forgotten relics. The shadows in the corners seemed to pulse slightly, shifting as if something unseen had just moved. Then he saw the footprints, faint, barely visible in the dust, leading away from the desk toward the attic window. He approached cautiously, keeping his weapon steady. The window was shut, but something had been watching. Outside, the abandoned Uneven streets of Brookmont stretched out beneath the moonlight. A single flickering streetlight cast long, jagged shadows across the pavement. Then, in the distance, a figure, standing in the middle of the road, completely still. Ethan's grip on his gun tightened. The figure was just standing there, facing the house, watching Dot. The second he blinked, it was gone. A chill ran down his spine. He wasn't dealing with an ordinary case. He pulled out his phone, snapped a picture of the desk, and turned to leave. Then the whisper came again. This time, closer. 17th breath. Ethan didn't hesitate. He stormed down the stairs, leaving the attic behind, stepping into the lifeless streets of Brookmont. He needed answers. 3:15 a.m. The abandoned hospital of Armitage Psychiatric Institute had been shut down for over 20 years. Officially, it was due to funding issues. Unofficially, people whispered about patients vanishing, doctors going insane, and experiments gone horribly wrong. Ethan had seen cases like this before. Cover-ups, secrets buried beneath official reports, and now every missing person in Brookmont had a connection to this place. The hospital loomed before him like a rotting corpse, windows shattered, vines crawling up the crumbling facade. The old sign, rusted and broken, still bore its name. Armitage Psychiatric Institute. Samine had spray painted a symbol over it. Ethan stopped. It was the same symbol from the attic. He wasn't the first one here. He unholstered his gun and stepped inside. Inside the hospital. The stench of mold and decay filled his lungs. Old gurneys lay overturned. Shattered glass crunched beneath his boots. Somewhere in the distance, water dripped. He moved forward, light sweeping the walls. Then he saw them, names, scrawled across. The peeling wallpaper in black ink. Row after row of names. And at the very end, his own name. Ethan crossed. His pulse spiked. How? He had never set foot in this place before. Then, beneath his name, there was something else. A date. February 3rd, 3:33 a.m. Exactly when Brookmont vanished. His breath came slow and controlled, but his mind raced. Someone knew he'd be here. Someone was expecting him. A faint noise echoed through the hallways. A low, rhythmic sound. Breathing. Not as. Ethan turned, gun raised, light cutting through the darkness. At the end of the hall, just beyond the reach of his flashlight, a man stood there. His face was obscured in shadow, but his breath was ragged, uneven. Ethan took a step forward. The man took a step back. Ethan's grip tightened. Who are you? Silence. Then the lights flickered. For a split second, the entire hallway was plunged into total darkness. And when the lights returned, the man was gone. No footprints, no sound, just gone. Ethan exhaled sharply. He had seen a lot in his career. Serial killers, underground syndicates, government conspiracies. But this was something else. Then his phone buzzed. A text message. Unknown number. Leave now. You don't have much time. His jaw clenched. His heartbeat was steady, but something deep inside him, some primal instinct, was telling him to listen. But Ethan Cross never walked away from a case. 3:33 a.m. The lower floor's basement level was even worse than the halls above. Rusted pipes ran along the ceiling, dripping blackened water onto the cracked tiles. The smell of rot was overpowering. And then he saw at a door. slightly ajar. Beyond it, a room filled with old patient files, their pages yellowed with time. Ethan stepped inside and pulled one from the stack. Case file, subject number 17. His eyes scanned. The first few lines: name, unknown admission date, February 3rd, 1980 for diagnosis, unresponsive, nonverbal, extreme paranoia, claims to hear voices from the other side. Status, transfer to where? Ethan flipped the page, and there was again the word .tenebra. Then the room temperature plummeted. His breath came out in a visible mist, and behind him, something moved. Ethan turned. Something was in the room with him. The door creaked shut, and the last thing he heard before everything went black was the sound of breathing. Darkness. Thick, suffocating, absolute. Ethan's senses sharpened as he fought against the void. His breath was steady, but his muscles were tense, coiled like a predator waiting to strike. The silence pressed against him, thick and unnatural, and then the breathing, slow, hollow, too close. His fingers twitched toward his gun, but a sharp click echoed through the air. A light flickered on, dim, flickering, barely enough to illuminate the room. Ethan's pulse remained controlled as his eyes adjusted. He was in a basement laboratory. The room was a decayed relic of its former self. Rusted surgical tables, shattered glass, overturned, filing cabinets, and a metal gurney, restraint still fastened, covered in deep scratch marks. The walls were lined with faded medical records, some torn, others soaked in something too dark to be watered. Then, his eyes landed on a single chair, positioned perfectly in the center of the room. Facing him, and in that chair, a body, Ethan's. Jaw tightened. The corpse had been sitting there for a long time, skin shriveled, lips blackened, eyes hollow sockets staring into nothing. But what made his stomach turn was the symbol carved into its forehead. Tenebra. His flashlight flickered. A short burst of static crackled through his earpiece. Something was interfering with the signal. Then, movement not in the room. On the security monitors, old CRT screens lined the far wall. Most of them cracked or completely dead, but one remained, active, its image warped and glitching. A live feed of the hospital's upper floors. Ethan leaned closer. The footage was grainy, distorted by waves of static. At first, the hall seemed empty, the same abandoned corridors he had just walked through. But then a figure appeared, a man, standing completely still in the middle of the hallway. The same one from before. Ethan narrowed his eyes. The figure on the monitor wasn't moving, but it was getting closer. The camera feed glitched again. Now the figure was 2 feet closer. Another flickered. 1 foot away. Then the screen went black. The overhead light shattered. The door to the lab slammed open. Ethan raised his gun, spinning around, but the hallway was empty. The static in his earpiece crackled louder. A voice, faint, distorted, whispering. 17th breath. Ethan clenched his jaw. That phrase again. The hair on his arm stood on end. He was being led somewhere, pushed towards something he couldn't yet see. But he wasn't a pawn. He was a hunter, and someone had just made a mistake. With a slow, measured breath, he holstered his gun and pulled out his phone. The power was flickering. No signal. Not surprising, but his His screen wasn't empty. There was a message from an unknown number. Stop searching. Leave Brookmont now. Ethan exhaled through his nose. Not a chance. The sound of scraping metal filled the air. His eyes flicked back toward the gurney. The restraints were unbuckled. 3:45 a.m. The restricted wing Ethan moved quickly, making his way toward the far end of the hospital. The air was thick with rot, the walls crumbling from years of neglect. Something about this place felt off, not just abandoned wrong. The deeper he went, the worse it got. Hallways that should have led to dead ends looped back into each other. Doors refused to open, only to be wide open when he turned back. The entire hospital was warping around him. And then he found it. A steel door, different from the others, newer. It had a biometric scanner. His brows furrowed. This place was supposed to be abandoned, but someone had kept this part operational. The scanner was shattered useless, but the door was slightly ajar. Someone had been here recently. Ethan slipped inside. Inside, the restricted wing rows of glass chambers lined the room. Cryogenic storage units. Most were shattered, their contents long gone, but one remained intact. And inside, a man. Ethan took a step forward. His heart rate remained steady, but his mind raced. Who the hell was this? The figure inside was pale, unmoving, eyes closed. Tubes ran from his body, pumping in a strange, dark fluid. Then his eyes opened. Ethan's breath slowed. The man was alive. His lips barely moved, his voice a breath against the glass. They took them. Ethan stepped closer. Who? The man's gaze locked onto his. They're not dead. They're waiting. Ethan's pulse quickened slightly. Where? The man exhaled sharply. His breath filed the glass, and then, just as suddenly as he had awoken, his body convulsed. His eyes rolled back. A violent, inhuman scream tore from his throat. The cryogenic chamber imploded. Glass exploded outward as a shockwave ripped through the room. Ethan barely had time to shield himself before something yanked him backward. 3:52 a.m. The hidden chamber. When Ethan opened his eyes, he was somewhere else. No longer in the hospital. No longer in Brookmont. The air was thick, dense, filled with something ancient. The walls around him pulsed like living flesh, veins running through the stone. The ground beneath his feet was wet. And in the distance Dash chanting. Low, deep, endless. Then torches flickered to life, illuminating the massive stone archway ahead, and carved into it the same symbol from the attic, from the corpse, from the hospital. DENEBRA. And beneath it, etched in old, decayed lettering 17. The 17th breath. Ethan's stomach twisted slightly. This wasn't just about Brookmont. This was something much bigger. And he had just stepped into its heart. The chanting grew louder. A deep, guttural sound that crawled through Ethan's bones, vibrating in his skull. The walls around him pulsed alive. The air was thick, suffocating, like he was breathing through tar. His instincts screamed at him to turn back, but there was no way out. He had stepped into something beyond human comprehension. The tunnel opened into a massive underground chamber. Torches burned along the stone walls, casting shadows that twisted and moved like they had a life of their own. At the center of the chamber stood an old roll, cracked, and covered in symbols he had seen before. And then he saw them figures in dark robes, their faces obscured by masks carved from bone. They stood in a perfect circle around the altar, their voices low and rhythmic, their hands raised in silent devotion. Ethan stayed in the shadows, watching, calculating. He had to be careful. Then he saw what was on the altar. A body, a woman motionless, her skin pale, her lips slightly parted. But she wasn't dead. Her chest rose and fell. Barely. She was breathing, barely alive. And beside her, an old man. Unlike the others, he didn't wear a mask. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken deep into his skull. But there was something unnatural about him, like he was too old, too ancient. His eyes locked onto Ethan's, as if he had known he was there all along. You should not have come, Detective. Cross. Ethan's grip on his gun tightened. His mind raced. How did he know his name? The old man's voice was calm, almost amused. You seek answers. You have been searching for the truth. The robed figure stepped back, parting to form a clear path toward the altar. Come forward. See for yourself. Ethan exhaled slowly. He had two choices: run and never know what happened to Brookmont, or step forward and risk losing his sanity. He moved Dot as he reached the altar. He could see the symbols carved into the stone. They weren't just random markings. They were names. Names of the missing. Names of every person in Brookmont. And at the very bottom, the most recent name carved into the stone: Ethan Cross. His pulse remained steady, but a slow realization crept into his mind. This was Glenn. He wasn't investigating a case. He was part of it. The old man smiled. You have felt it, haven't you? The pull, the voices, the 17th breath is almost complete. Ethan clenched his jaw. What the hell is the 17th breath? The old man's expression didn't change. The end of what you call reality. The chanting grew louder. The ground trembled beneath them. The air itself seemed to bend and crack. The woman on the altar twitched. Her breath hitched. Her eyes snapped open, and Ethan saw pure terror. Her mouth opened, but no scream came. Instead, a voice, a deep, otherworldly voice that did not belong to her. The door is open. Ethan's instincts kicked in. He moved, grabbing the woman, pulling her off the altar. The robed figures lunged, but he was faster. Gunfire echoed through the chamber. 1, 2, 3 shots. Figures collapsed, blood staining their robes. The old man didn't move. He simply smiled. It's too late. Ethan ignored him, gripping the woman tightly as he sprinted toward the tunnel. The walls pulsed harder, the light from the torches flickering violently. The air cracked. Something was coming. He could feel it. For 12 a.m., the escapathan ran. The woman's breathing was shallow, but she was alive. That was all that mattered. The tunnel twisted and stretched as if reality itself was shifting around him. But he kept moving, kept fighting. Then late, a crack of dawn breaking through, an opening ahead. He pushed forward, bursting into the cold morning air, gasping. They were out. Behind them, the entrance to the underground chamber collapsed. Silence. No chanting, no whispers. Just the wind. The woman stirred in his arms, her voice weak. They were waiting. Her breath hitched. They're still waiting. Ethan looked back at the ruins. The symbols were gone. The entrance was gone. Brookmont was still empty. The people were still missing. But the ritual had been stopped. For now, for 4:45 a.m., final message. Ethan sat in his car, hands gripping the wheel. His mind replayed every second of what had happened. He had seen many things in his life, but this was something else. His phone buzzed. A text message, unknown number. You delayed it, but it is not over. Ethan's jaw tightened. Then, below the message, one final word. 17th. His eyes flicked up to the rearview mirror. For a brief second, a shadow moved behind him, then dashed nothing. Ethan exhaled slowly. This wasn't over, and deep down, he knew it never would be.